Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, April 8th, 2025, and our friend Colonel Wilkerson is back with us. Welcome back, sir.
Good to be with you, Neiman.
We had a meeting between Donald Trump and Netanyahu in which they were talking about Gaza. And here is what Donald Trump said, Larry.
I don't understand why Israel ever gave it up. Israel owned it. It wasn't this man, so I can say it. He wouldn't have given it up. I know him very well. There's no way. They took oceanfront property and they gave it to people for peace. How did that work out? Not good.
Is the immigration, sorry, Mr. President, is the immigration plan still on the agenda?
Which immigration?
From Gaza. From Gaza.
All it is a concept that I had that I think is good, and now people are copying it. You know, baby, do you want to tell? People are talking about the Trump plan. Gee, why don't we do that? Would you like to answer that question?
I think what the president talked about is, first of all, to give people a choice. You know, Gazans were closed in, and every other place, including in arenas of battle. I mean, whether it's Ukraine or Syria or any other place, people could leave. Gaza was the only place where they locked them in. We didn't lock them in. They're locked in. And what is wrong with giving people a choice? Now, we've been talking, including over lunch, about some countries, I won't go into them right now, that are saying, you know, if Gazans want to leave, we want to take them in. And I think this is the right thing to do. If you give, you know, it's going to take years to rebuild Gaza. In the meantime, people can have an option. The president has a vision. Countries are responding to that vision. We're working on it. I hope we'll have good news for you.
Yeah. Larry, your take.
Well, I'd already watched that, and I found it very painful to watch. I don't know who was the most sickening, I know who was the most ignorant, Donald Trump. Netanyahu knows the real facts, so his appearance was just lying. Let's just face it for a second. This is a man who ran very, very accurately described by Gideon Levy and others from Haaretz and other places of critical thought, a concentration camp, an open-air concentration camp. But we know exactly why Israel turned Gaza over to the Palestinians. They were getting beat the hell out of in the place, and they felt, and rightfully so, I think, the IDF leadership in particular, that they didn't need to be in there, that they could constrain the Gazans, as it were, much easier from the outside than the inside. They didn't count on the elections. I think Bibi Netanyahu did count on the elections that put Hamas in power, because Bibi Netanyahu has been allied with Hamas ever since those elections. He's been passing money to them from Qatar and other places. He's allied with them because they are adamantly against a two-state solution, whereas, for example, the Palestinian Authority, ill-led by Mahmoud Abbas and other Palestinians, but nonetheless were for a two-state solution. So he used Hamas to fight the Palestinian Authority. And he kept them in a concentration camp. Now listen to what he said. Other people have a choice of leaving. They have a choice of leaving or die. They have a choice of leaving or have their mosque and their hospitals and their villages bombed to smithereens. They have a choice of leaving, and he compares it with Ukraine. What a joke. I mean, I had difficulty watching these two people. First of all, Trump is so ignorant of history, can't put two English sentences together to make a coherent thought. And Netanyahu's over there just nodding his head and looking like his fat, genocidal self. And this is in my Oval Office. This is in the Oval Office of the President of the United States. This is utterly disgusting. And yet, the American people seem, all 340 some odd million of them, going down every day as Trump runs his RDI flights. This is another thing, Neiman. This is what this is. Misha Glenny pointed out years ago in his book, McMafia, that the number one criminal activity in the world, generating somewhere between $2 and $3 trillion every year in the black economy, was trafficking in people, mostly young boys and girls and women for prostitution and such. Trafficking in people even beat out illicit drugs and arms. That's what Donald Trump has established, a state-sponsored trafficking in people program. He is making money. The United States is going to make money off deporting all these people. They aren't going to Guantanamo, as he promised. I checked yesterday, there are about 30 people at Guantanamo. The military is not even committed to it. They're using civilian airliners. In fact, there was an expose piece yesterday also about the flight attendants on one of these civilian airliners who are really not very happy taking 200 men shackled from head to foot in their airplanes and treating them, you know, as flight attendants are supposed to treat them, and being scared livid the whole time they're on the flight, and being accompanied by a few Customs and Border Patrol armed guards and so forth, who really don't do squat for them. They're really angry about how they were promised to do one sort of air flights, and now they're doing these what I call really the equivalent of rendition, detention, interrogation flights. Only the product here is not terrorism or torture at the other end and intelligence, supposedly. The product here is money, because we're paying people like El Salvador to do this, and they're paying us back in terms of what we want from them. So this is a new business. It is going to, if Trump has his way, rival the slave trade. It is going to be another equivalent to the slave trade many years ago that was so profitable. This is going to be majorly profitable. Trump shipping people, trafficking in people at a state level. Incredible. And that's the two people we just watched, at least one of them. And Bibi would be all for this. Bibi would be all for Trump flying these civilian airliners into Gaza, picking up the Gazans and taking them somewhere. He'd be all for it, and he'd be making money off of it. You bet this is Trump's way of dealing with profit making for the empire. You're muted, or I can't hear you.
Yeah. Netanyahu was talking about sending Gazans to Syria or Ukraine. I would wonder if I wouldn't be surprised if they have already started to talk with Al-Jolani or Zelensky about this.
I wouldn't either. Ukraine's critical need is for manpower. If, you know, the Europeans and others are going to support it in continuing the war, and Syria would be a place also, I would think, that might accept some of them. But look at what they're doing. They're just shifting them from one hell to another hell, because Israel is fast wreaking its havoc in Syria as well. More bombs drop every day. Netanyahu is unstoppable in that sense. As long as the empire is behind him, he is very much so unstoppable. And let me go over some things here that are really troubling in the sense that Israel is collapsing. I picked this up the other day and I couldn't believe it, so I checked on it. The Rehabilitation Division of the Israeli Defense Ministry, the Rehabilitation Division of the Israeli Defense Ministry, leaked a report that 16,500 plus IDF have been wounded. Remember what I told you about the WIA count and the KIA count, and how the WIA count indicates more than the KIA? But I checked into the KIA, and the KIA seemed a little high to me, but it was over 4,000. And then they reported that and this is a direct quote from the report, 7,300 of those 16,500 who've been wounded are dealing with, quote, psychological trauma of the first order. In other words, post-traumatic stress and that sort of thing. You can bet that if this is an official report from an element of the Israeli Defense Ministry, that's probably about half of the truth. That you can probably double those figures. I also found out that fully a third of the reservists who were supposed to have been called up and reported for duty by now for this second tranche of murder and genocide didn't show up. I also found out what that is doing basically to the Israeli economy, which is truly serious. And Shir Haber has been one to point much of this out. I also looked into what was the decision with regard to Haredim, who were supposed to show up. They've made no decision, and only about, I think it was something like 10% of those who had been made vulnerable to the draft, so to speak, who have shown up. And the other 90% have said, go, do yourself some harm somewhere. They're not going to show up. And we know what's happening to the Israeli economy. And then I looked at Haaretz, and I was going over their lead page. That's the oldest newspaper in Israel and one of the few that tells the truth about things there. And I just looked at all the different headlines about the trouble Netanyahu is in, the trouble the court is in, and is now responding to Netanyahu to do something about that. Things like Netanyahu admits to Qatargate leaks, shattering his image as a national security hawk. Top court hears petitions against Netanyahu's dismissal of Shin Bet chief. Israel's top court must step up, this is an editorial, and stop Netanyahu. Revelations about Netanyahu's request from Shin Bet are terrifying. And it goes on and on and on. Israel's falling apart. And what is Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu doing in the Oval Office of the American people, talking the way they were talking? Israel's falling apart. And Donald Trump is Donald Trump's secret motive to do this? Is Donald Trump really operating on a different sheet of music than we all think? Is he really smarter than we all think? Is he trying to do what he can to topple the state of Israel because he's angry, he's mad, he's furious about it? I don't know. But it would look like that to me because Israel is falling apart. At the same time, you watch that other press conference with J.D. Vance and Secretary Hegseth and Donald Trump talking about what they're doing to al-Ansar, the Houthis. That's total lie. Total lie. I've been probing the Pentagon, trying to figure out what's going on here. Who's giving them these lies? Who's telling them that, for example, those people they dropped those strike munitions in the center of weren't actually there for a Ramadan feast rather than a bunch of terrorists? It's clear that's what they were there for. We haven't effective Ansar at all, other than to begin to kill a lot of Yemeni civilians. Now, in Yemen, we know that most civilians are armed, women and men. It's just the nature of the beast there. So are they selling this to Hegseth and he to Trump because everyone in Yemen carries a AK or an M16 or something like that equivalent? It's because it's such a dangerous place, and the Saudis and others have made it even more dangerous. So what are they trying to do here? And they're talking about going after Iran and talking so seriously now that I'm beginning to think they might be serious. They're conducting talks, but look at the paper they published. The paper they published with their objectives. There's no way Iran is going to sign up to those objectives. So where are we going with that? This is looking more and more, Nima, like we're setting up the Sarajevo event of 1914 for 2025. In other words, we're going for a bigger, wider regional war that ultimately will turn out to be a disaster. Those press conferences, the ones with Netanyahu, the ones with his cabinet, principal cabinet, they're disasters if what they're purporting to say becomes reality. On top of all of that, I just read Secretary Hegseth's essential guidance, direction with regard to China and the so-called shift to China. We're going to war over Taiwan too, it appears. It appears that Hegseth is dead serious, and Trump must be too, that we are going to go to war over Taiwan. They're determined that that's going to happen. They're going to shift things to that. This is a nightmare. This is a nightmare. As I've said many times before, if we like the Houthis, we're going to love the Iranians. And if we like the Houthis and love the Iranians, we're going to love the Chinese even more, because they're going to beat the Jesus out of us. And that's what we're looking at. That's what we're looking at. At the same time we're doing this, Nima, we just had a request from the United States Army, already so small it couldn't lick Peter Pan and his gang, to reduce their numbers by 60,000, reduce their end strength by 60,000. Now, I know why they're doing this, I think. because they're so embarrassed by not being able to recruit to their in-strength authorizations each year. But is that a reason to cut your forces? And Hegseth in this paper seems to think that there won't be any army anyway. You won't need to go on to Taiwan because the Air Force and the Navy will take care of the Chinese. This is idiocy. This is insanity. And yet it's running our country.
Larry, what are those main objectives that the Trump administration is seeking in terms of negotiations with Iran? We've learned that Donald Trump is talking about that they're going to directly talk with Iranians on Saturday. And on the part of Iranians, they're saying that, we're going to do that, but it's a indirect talk. But whatever is that, the nature of that sort of talk is, what do they want to achieve in these negotiations?
Well, apparently they leaked the National Security Decision Memorandum, someone did, that codifies the 6 or 7 or 8 objectives of these talks. But as you might imagine, they are not in any way, fashion, or form going to get the Ayatollah or the IRGC leadership or the Guardian Council or anybody to agree to about 50% of this, if not the entire list. It includes such things as, of course, the nuclear program. It must be gone away completely and verifiable 100%. They want to deal with the ballistic missiles. They don't want them to have any ballistic missiles. They don't want them to have any defense at all. They want them to be totally exposed to our very heavily weaponed by us, Saudi Arabia, for example, whom I suggest they probably consider one of their number one threats in the region, in terms of powers in the area. And everything else that goes on in between there is essentially Iran disarming itself. That's what this calls for. Now, if we even take the position that, okay, Trump's going in heavy because he wants positions he can fall off of, he really does want to do diplomacy, that's one thing, with the nuclear issue being the key one. But his own intelligence community is still telling him, has told him, since the first NIE came out indicating this, that Iran is not working on a nuclear weapon. Yes, they have the 60, 70% enriched uranium. Yes, they could take a week or two and go to 90% plus and build a bomb. Perhaps. We don't know that. Perhaps. Someone said to me yesterday, they quoted me, the first time Bibi Netanyahu said Iran was 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. It was 15 years ago. 2 weeks away from a nuclear weapon. He's been saying that ever since, off and on. So have other people, including in the United States. So this is preposterous. And what they're doing is they've set up, as I understand it, they've set up direct talks, but through Omani good offices. And Witkoff is going to be the principal guy, as I understand it. And Witkoff is, as I've said before, mild-mannered, probably the only one of the administration that seems like he knows what diplomacy might be, but he is utterly ignorant of Iranian history. He's utterly ignorant of what it means to go in there with these kind of parameters and these kind of demands and to be rebuffed. And I think Iran is in for maybe not a shock because they're used to dealing with the idiots in the empire, but they're probably going to shut down almost immediately if this list is what Witkoff presents, and Witkoff seems adamant about it. And I don't know if he understands what Donald Trump is trying to do, if indeed there is some purpose behind it other than just ballyhoo, or if he's versed in what complications he's going to have and has some kind of plan to deal with them. But I don't see these negotiations as bearing any fruit, and certainly not the fruit that Donald Trump has now officially codified that he wants in this memorandum. So where do we go from there, Nima? Where do we go? Well, I mean, he said where we go. He said we will go the same place with Iran that we are now engaged in with the Houthis.
Here is, Larry, what Donald Trump and Netanyahu, they said about the situation with Iran in terms of the talks.
Discussed Iran. Look, we're both united in the goal that Iran does not ever get nuclear weapons. If it could be done diplomatically in a full way, the way it was done in Libya, I think that would be a good thing. But whatever happens, we have to make sure that Iran does not have nuclear weapons. That's the end of my speech.
Mr. President,
It's close to end. We're having direct talks with, wait a minute, wait. We're having direct talks with Iran. And they've started, it'll go on Saturday. We have a very big meeting and we'll see what can happen. And I think everybody agrees that doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And the obvious is not something that I want to be involved with, or frankly, that Israel wants to be involved with if they can avoid it. So we're going to see if we can avoid it. But it's getting to be very dangerous territory. And hopefully those talks will be successful. And I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful. We hope that's going to happen.
You look at the way that they put Steve Witkoff in charge of negotiations with Iran. And you look at the history of Steve Witkoff, the recent history is not that long, but in the ceasefire between Israel and Palestine and with Russia, and no that much positive outcome out of these two. The failure the ceasefire has totally failed in Gaza. And the case of Russia is not that much going forward so far. And they started a new talk with Iran. And as you've mentioned, Witkoff, it seems to me he's a mastermind of geopolitics, and he's going to, because you have to know something about the history of these sort of talks. You cannot go there and just inventing things and solving the problem.
He's a real estate salesman. I mean, that's really what he is. Mild-mannered though he may be and diplomatic sounding, and he puts English sentences together, unlike Trump, in some kind of coherent fashion. So, but you're right. He's utterly ignorant going into this, just as he was utterly ignorant and remains so with regard to Ukraine. And we're seeing that right now. Putin has all the upper hand right now with regard to Ukraine. And Putin knows that. And as far as he's concerned, ceasefires benefit the loser, not the winner. So, whatever we do, if there's a ceasefire, has to benefit me. And that's going to take some work for you, Mr. Witkoff. And I don't think he understands that. It's worse with regard to Ukraine or with regard to Iran. You know how I felt. I felt and was holding out that hope that Trump was serious about negotiating a deal, that he wanted a deal. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize. He wants a deal. He wants one that is billed and propagandized as better than the one that Obama got, better than the JCPOA. And I thought that's what's motivating him. I think I've been fooled. I think I was wrong. I think this guy, and Bibi Netanyahu, was lying to his teeth, which he does routinely, as was Trump to him, if Trump believes it. Bibi wants a war. Bibi wants the United States to eliminate any possibility, not just the nuclear program, but any possibility that Iran could be a significant threat to him as he becomes more and more belabored on several fronts. And as what I told you just a few moments ago is happening to Israel. I didn't even mention what the real prospects for their economy are. I'm not sure we're going to have the trillions that are going to be necessary to bail Israel out after this in terms of economic revival. So we're looking at a situation that Trump has now evaluated incorrectly, if we believe him. I don't believe him, really. I think he understands that the man sitting beside him wants him to take Iran out, cleanly out. And I believe both of them think air power alone can do that. It can't. It simply can't. So what do you do when you start dropping bombs on 90 million people who have the capacity that Iran has now? You have a real mess because Iran is going to respond. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't just respond massively against Israel. Remember back there when it was October, when they didn't respond? They did not respond at all to that Israeli strike. First, because it was ineffectual. It didn't do very much damage at all. And Iran was happy to see that. Russians had told them a little bit about the capacity they had once the Russians had trained them up. And Iran probably was the benefactor of Russian intelligence that told them what the traffic was amongst those lead pilots in the Israeli Air Force when they were actually scared to go any further and turned around or launched their munitions from well out. That's one reason it was such an ineffectual strike. So we're looking at the possibility that what we would envision Iran doing as a response to our strikes, were we to mount them, is going to be very different than what we're envisioning. That is to say, they're going to destroy Israel. And it wouldn't be that hard. At this point, it wouldn't be that hard because Israel is teetering right now. It's teetering economically. It's teetering militarily. It's taken far more casualties than anybody thought. It's got far more no-shows in its reserve forces than anybody thought. And it's got far more problems with those. And here's another thing, Nima. When you look at what I just told you about the rehab report, about PTSD and so forth, what you have taken from the battlefield is people who actually suffered traumatic stress from what they were doing. Now think about that for a moment. Think about the logic of that. You've taken the people off the battlefield who were good soldiers. I would like to say somewhat like American soldiers. They really don't like murdering women, children, babies, doctors, destroying mosques and so forth. They don't like that. So they've got post-traumatic stress. What do you have left, Nima? What you have left that you're putting in Gaza are the Smotrich lookalikes, the Ben Gvir lookalikes, the truly radical people who you have people who will bury an ambulance. Perez carried that story too, with photos. They buried the ambulance and then tried to get out of it. Even the Israelis are having to investigate that, like they had to investigate Rachel Corrie when I was chief of staff. So you've got really bad people on the battlefield now, by and large, because the others who have come back have post-traumatic stress from what they were doing. So this is a recipe for Israel's destruction, utter and total destruction. And Iran could put the coup de grace to that. They could put the tap on it. We couldn't do anything about that because while we're bombing them, they'll be bombing Israel, or they'll be bombing the oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, or they'll be bombing Al Udeid, or they'll be bombing something else that is relatively undefended that has our assets on it and destroying billions of dollars worth of our equipment. I also looked at the ratio of cost for the Houthis and costs for us. Do you know we actually have people in the Pentagon who are briefing Hegseth that this can't keep up, that the cost ratio difference is just too great? And also, if you want to turn to China, how do you turn to China when you've just diminished your stores of critical weaponry, which is the weaponry you're planning on using against China, especially if you do the Taiwan scenario? We're a disaster, Nima. We're a disaster, militarily, budget-wise. Trump in the Oval Office bragging about $1 trillion defense budget. I wouldn't be bragging about that. We're at a point now where the money we've given the Defense Department has utterly polluted their genes. They can't think anymore. The F-35 is a perfect example of that. But the 47, named after Trump, numbered after Trump, is even a worse boondoggle coming up. And everyone knows that. The Boeing people know that even. It's going to be a boondoggle on top of boondoggle. And another $1 trillion, it's polluting the Pentagon. They can't think. The money is too thick. They can't think. Then on the other side of that coin, 53% of that money is going to go to contractors, going to go to their salaries, going to go to their shareholders and so forth. It isn't going to go to building a beautiful airplane, as Trump says. It's not going to be a beautiful airplane. It's going to be a boondoggle. Meanwhile, our submarines are suffering. The Virginia-class attack is not going to be replaced. The Columbia-class, Ohio-class submarines that carry our ballistic missiles, they're not going to be replaced because both programs are cost overruns and way beyond the date they were supposed to produce. By law, Congress is supposed to cancel both programs. So what are we going to do? We're going to retrofit and try to keep the old boats going. We're a disaster militarily, Nima, and the American people are being abjectly lied to from the Oval Office by Peter Hegseth and Donald Trump, being lied to about the capacity of their military. Greatest military on earth, and I'm putting all this money behind them. They're going to be even greater. That is a bald-faced lie. It's a lie that tears me up inside because I know how bad our military has become. It is a far cry from that military that Colin Powell sent into Southwest Asia for Desert Shield and Desert Storm. It is such a far cry from that military that it doesn't even have any resemblance.
I would wonder if Donald Trump knows about it or he's getting
Nope.
the.
No, and Hegseth is not the person to tell him. He's lickspittle, sycophant. I'll do whatever you tell me to do, and I'll add 3 bags as I'm doing it. We've seen that now enough to where we know that. I have no doubts about that gentleman anymore, and I use gentleman guardedly.
Larry, on the part of Iranians, we've learned one of the members of the Supreme Security Council in his recent interview with the media in Iran said that we were all in favor, all the members voted in favor of the True Promise 3, the response, the latest response of Iran toward Israel. The only member that voted against that attack was the president of Iran, Pezeshkian. And he could prevail after all, as we're witnessing right now. So far, they didn't respond. And do you think that Donald Trump understands the situation in Iran and the way that this government is trying to do everything possible in order to make some sort of deal with the West?
You're right, Nima. And I heard this morning early that they, and I also confirmed it, at least in an editorial sense in Haaretz, that the Iranians have begun to disarm their militias in Iraq. That would be an incredible achievement in terms of this pressure that the president wants to bring on. If they indeed have begun to take care of the problem we have in Iraq, the basic problem we have there, where they attack us every now and then, and they're sponsored by Iran and they're armed by Iran and funded by Iran. If the news is correct, and it comes from both intelligence sources and Haaretz confirming it, the Iranians are in fact disarming their militias inside Iraq. That says they are at least very serious and doing some serious things to make this work, to make the talks work. So I have to say that Iran is coming into this as a serious mediator or a serious discussant. Yes, a serious party. It was only 2, so really. And I should say 3. Bibi's always hovering in the background. If that's the case, then maybe my dismissal of my hopes for Trump still being focused on a deal are wrong. Maybe Trump is really focused on a deal, and he wants a deal, and he's willing to fall off some of the more adamant parameters of that memorandum. I can't believe, though, that he's been briefed adequately on what the Iranians will think about some of those things. Were I to walk into negotiations and someone to put that on, and I were Iranian, and someone were to put those demands on the table, I'm not sure what my reaction would be other than to get up and walk out. If they're willing to go through that burden of humiliation, if you will, and this is a huge burden on them because that's the burden they've been bearing ever since the Shah fell and before, then I don't know. I just don't know. I'm prepared to back up and say, yeah, Trump was in fact interested in a deal for whatever reason, Nobel Peace Prize or whatever, because we are actually negotiating and something's happening. But I got to see it first now, because there are so many pronouncements that have been made that you can't just say, well, that's to gain negotiating leverage, because they're just too ignorant and too stupid and too illogical. But look at a logical response. For Iran, a logical response, for example, is disarming the militias in Iraq. That shows they're serious. That shows they're very serious about this. I'm sure that probably is a footnote to the demands in the memorandum, if not an explicit demand, that you quit backing the militias in the region that are attacking U.S. soldiers and such. So they're serious. My question is, are we? Which is our serious side? Is our serious side, I want a deal? Or is our serious side, what we're doing to the Houthis.
Larry, here is what the president of Iran said about the talks between the United States and Iran, and this message was before the announcement that Donald Trump said that they're going to have a direct talk in Oman. Here is what the president of Iran said.
Again, that the Islamic Republic doesn't want war. He said Tehran does favor negotiations, but not at any cost. Masoud Pezeshkian says Iran wants to negotiate, but the U.S. needs to prove that it truly intends to negotiate as well. He added that Washington cannot threaten Iran every day while calling for negotiations at the same time. Pezeshkian stressed that Iran will not submit to any humiliation. Meanwhile, Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqi says the U.S. is yet to respond to Iran's proposal for indirect talks on its nuclear program and sanctions removal. He once again reiterated that Tehran will, under no circumstances, seek nuclear weapons as instructed by Islam.
Yeah. It was before the agreement on the part of the United States to indirectly talk with Iran. And here is today what the foreign minister of Iran said, Araghchi. He said that Iran prefers diplomacy but knows how to defend itself. It seems that the way that he's talking about this sort of their attitude toward the United States, you're going to talk, we're going to talk. If you're going to attack us, we know how to defend the country.
Well, I think they're doing a little Trump there. And understandably so, they're trying to build some leverage for themselves. But clearly, if they are indeed disarming their militias in Iraq, they are also showing signs of being compliant with some of the wishes that the United States, they feel, will have and may have been expressed in that memorandum, which is public knowledge now, apparently. I'm sure it was leaked on purpose. That's a fairly skilled way of going about it from the Persian point of view, from the Iranian point of view. Our way of going about it is pure, unadulterated threat. And the Houthis are the reflection of that threat right now because Trump has said, and Hegseth has said, that's what's going to happen to Iran. So they're demonstrating. That's what part of the reason for doing this in the Red Sea is all about, is demonstrating to Iran what's going to happen to them if they don't comply with what the United States wants, basically, in these negotiations. That's a hell of a way to start off negotiations, but it's the way the empire generally does things these days. You threaten with bombs, bullets, bayonets, and sanctions, and then you implement either one or both, and then maybe you get to negotiations, or you use, as in Ukraine, proxies to do that. And that's what we've done, of course, with Russia.
Yeah. And today we know that Maria Zakharova, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman, she said that Russia, China, and Iran will hold expert-level consultations on Iran nuclear program. And I would wonder, what are they talking about right now, and what is the main goal of this sort of meeting?
You have to remember, I think, that Russia and China, of course, were part of the JCPOA. At that particular time, it was my understanding, and I was plugged into a little bit of it, that neither wanted Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Neither country wanted Iran to have a nuclear weapon. So it was an agreed position amongst the Perm 5 and Germany, and the EU was a participating partner too, that it was a negative for Iran to have a nuclear weapon in that region. Now put a little coda on that put a little footnote on that for a minute, and let me say that Netanyahu in the Oval Office, the clip you played before, saying that Iran couldn't be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. Well, why do you have one then, Bibi? Why do you have one, Bibi? Bibi, you shouldn't have one either. And you might know that Russia has put out a prospective position ahead of what they hope will be nuclear talks, that China will participate. Xi Jinping has agreed to participate. Russia has agreed to participate, that they can style it as a New START discussion. That treaty, the only one left, goes out in February of 26. And Putin has asked some pretty pertinent questions, like, okay, if we were to bring North Korea in, you would have to bring Israel in. Other things like that, which is good diplomacy and I think positive moves, good moves, because I've been advocating for this all along. We need a new multilateral treaty regime that includes all 9 nuclear weapon owning states. Otherwise, it's kind of silly for us in Moscow or us in Beijing to negotiate. So we're at a point where there are other options out there, which Trump said that he wanted to do, that are far more important than just shutting down the Ukraine war or shutting down the genocide in Gaza. There are regional and even global implications to both of these regions, militarily and otherwise. So we need to leap beyond these as we fix these and get into this realm of truly serious, existential even, negotiations and work and diplomacy. I'm not sure Trump has a team that's capable of that. I'm confident Putin does with Lavrov and his staff, and I'm confident Wang Yi and Xi Jinping do in China. So how do we leap over these two, fixing these two, Ukraine and Gaza and Southwest Asia in general, Iran at the center of that, and get to these bigger things, which is what these other powers want. Russia and China want this. They want to deal with these more existential issues and get beyond the issues that basically the empire created. I mean, we enabled the genocide and we enabled the war in Ukraine. There's no getting around that. We did. We enabled both. We're still enabling the one and maybe even still enabling the other, from what I'm hearing about no cutoff of the money, no cutoff of the arms in Ukraine. Smart people on that side, really stupid people on this side being us. This is a marvelous opportunity. At the same time, it could be a new Sarajevo and a new World War I, but it's a marvelous opportunity if we can use diplomacy to get beyond this Sarajevo moment, if you will, and solve those problems and then leap into this new, huge problematic world of nuclear weapons and the climate crisis and get everyone in there to help us work on it. You think Trump is capable of doing that? I have my doubts. I really have my doubts. The man who is setting up a slave trade and prisoners, deportees, putting airlines in the air to fly them around and making money off of it. I just don't see him being that kind of president, but I hope I'm wrong.
Do you see the Witkoff team and Steve Witkoff and his team capable of learning the way that Russia at least was negotiating with him and with the Trump administration? Is there any sort of learning curve going up, and it just continues flat and they're not getting what Russia is talking about, and consequently with these talks between Iran and the United States would be the same? Because it's so important if they're willing to understand the other part.
Yeah. I don't know Witkoff intimately enough to make a cogent comment on that, but he strikes me as a man who could learn and might learn from the other side, if you will, and from the people offering the good offices and from others, as long as he's not too badly influenced by Bibi Netanyahu. And I have fears there because he seems to be, while willing to talk to Netanyahu in rough tones if necessary, he seems to be of that gang that is mesmerized by Bibi. And that worries me. But yes, I think he probably is capable of learning if he'll just listen, especially to the Omanis and others who understand the situation a little better, and to his counterparts on the other side of the table, the Iranians. But he's got to deal with Trump, too. He's got to deal with Trump. And Trump doesn't deal in subtleties. He doesn't even know what the word subtlety means.
The other day I
Remember,
was watching, and yeah, go
you
ahead.
remember Putin's definition of nuance? Another term for subtlety. that's a good case in point.
Larry, the other day I was watching Israeli media. One of the experts on that channel was talking about how the Arab states are just simply betraying the their part, the Israeli side of the conflict, and they're saying that they're doing everything to connect with Iran. They're just saying that we are not going to be part of any sort of attack on you, and the same way they're just getting back and trying to do everything with the United States and Israel, that they're not going to help Iran. How do you find the way that the Arab states are behaving right now? Do you see the possibility of improving their behavior in terms of the security of the region? Because we know that they're interested in the security of the region, but the way that they're behaving, is it constructive? Is it helping the situation, the process of negotiations, or they're gonna blow it up as Erdogan did, as we know what with the case of Erdogan?
Well, this is a blanket statement, and I usually don't like to make blanket statements, but I think, frankly, the Arab states, with few exceptions, are reprehensible. But I've thought that for a long time, ever since I had to prepare Powell for the 9/11 Commission testimony and really found out that the Saudis were probably involved. And I don't mean just a few Saudis. I mean members of the royal family. I think their behavior has been not only reprehensible, it's been duplicitous. It's been a holdout for let's get back to the Abraham Accords and all that they promised. So we can't really do anything seriously in support of the Palestinians, no matter what our street in Cairo or Riyadh or wherever it might be is saying, and trying to walk that middle line all the time, which is what Bandar was accused of by Powell in a way that was derisive and not complimentary. I think that's their approach. Whatever looks like it's going to be more profitable for us, we're going to do at any given moment. We do not have any principles. We do not have any guidelines to go by except our own prosperity, our own profit, our own staying in power if you're the Saudi royals. And that's reprehensible, as I said. But, will that change? I think you saw probably that Morocco came out with a fairly powerful statement. They had, up to this point, not made much statement about the Palestinians, but words don't do anything. We're beyond words now. You need to put up or shut up. And the Arabs don't seem to be capable of that. They just don't. I'm worried about the same phenomena in Syria. Lots of talk, lots of rhetoric, lots of we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But Israel's doing what it pleases in Syria. When it pleases, how it pleases, usually with bombs. It's doing what it pleases. So, and Erdogan has shown that he's not much better than the Arabs. I thought that at one point there, Erdogan, in his own self-interest, might do something solid with regard to Syria, but I don't see that happening now that he thinks he's solved his Kurdish problem. And now he's concentrated on getting rid of his political opposition, becoming even more of a tyrant himself. What happens in Turkey when these sorts of things go on? The military takes over. I mean, it hadn't happened in a while, but it could happen again. When the civilians get so confused about democracy and start jailing people and taking out their opponents or potential opponents by trumped up charges and arrests, the military takes over. So I don't know where we're headed in any of these places right now that are so serious to the stability of Southwest Asia and the Levant, and so serious ultimately to U.S. interests. But we don't have a person who's sensitive to those interests in the White House, nor in the Pentagon, nor at the State Department, nor in the Congress, with few exceptions. You probably saw the other day that now Grassley from Ohio from Iowa, the nation's really first farm state, is putting together some legislation, which Trump says he's going to veto, that'll try to return to Congress some of the power over things like tariffs so that they can check Trump. Well, this is Grassley. This is a Republican from Iowa. And it'd be interesting if they pass the legislation and have enough votes combined with the Democrats to override a veto. So we're not even into the first year well of Trump's presidency, and disaster looms everywhere.
Larry, we had a report on CNN shows that so far, in a short period of time, the United States has spent $1 billion to fight Yemen, and no outcome for that.
I suspect it's double or triple that. I really do think it might be, because it's a $500 million plus for Reapers, MQ-9's drones shot down alone. Not to mention all those missiles that have been come off those ships. I mean, this is real money.
I don't know if you saw Donald Trump sharing a video on his X account that says that they're hitting people, as you mentioned it, that they're hitting people who are celebrating the Eid in the religious Eid in their culture. But do you think that Donald Trump knew about the nature of that gathering, or he didn't know? He was informed that these people are preparing to attack you?
Well, there's two things you have to worry about with sycophants. And Peter Hegseth is a sycophant par excellence. The two things you have to worry about are, one, that because they are sycophants and they seek your approval in every way, fashion, and form, that when something is adverse, they're not going to tell you about it. They're not going to give you the real facts. So Hegseth comes across, as he did in that Oval Office setting, where he says, we're just pounding the heck out of them. We're destroying them. Iran, take note, we're destroying the Houthis. They're doing no such thing whatsoever. And if you took the Marine Corps, the United States Marine Corps, the entire Marine Corps, and you did an amphibious operation, if we had the bottoms to do it, I'm not sure we do. We haven't had our MEUs and ARGs, Marine Expeditionary Units and Amphibious Ready Groups, in their patrol lanes, as it were, across the globe for about 2 years, because we don't have the amphibious bottoms to take them. So if you kludged all the amphibious bottoms that the Navy has, and you did an amphibious operation, say right there at Sana'a or at Hodeidah or wherever it'd be most propitious to do it, they'd be swallowed. In 6 months, they wouldn't be there anymore. They'd be running. That's what would happen. And the Marines are the best we have, the absolute best we have. That terrain and those fighters and the mountains that they would recede to and that you would then have to attack them in, you're not going to do it. So what are you going to do? You're going to put the Army there too. Oh, wait a minute. What did I say about the Army? It's going to go down from 450 or so thousand down to around 390 or so. Ooh, that Army's looking awful small. Where are you going to get it from? Oh, so you're going to continue the bombing. They think bombing will do everything. Bombing does not convince people to do anything but be extremely angry with you and to die by the last person. That's what bombing does. So Hegseth doesn't know what he's talking about. He has no idea what he's talking about. And it would be even worse if we tried to do an amphibious operation or land forces in, or both. We'd have to do both. We'd have to do a Desert Shield, Desert Storm all over again with about 1/10 the capacity. That's what we'd have to do. And we wouldn't have the 600,025, I think it was 625,000 that comprised that coalition. It wasn't a coalition of the willing. It was a huge coalition. It had Syrians, it had French, it had 37 countries, as I recall, something like that. And, you know, although the United States did the lion's share and Britain did the lion's share of the work in terms of the attack, it was a formidable coalition. And that coalition diplomatically and in terms of it operating for the United Nations and everything was a signal. It was a signal of H.W. Bush's desire for a new world order where the UN would actually be an effective organization. We don't have that anymore. We've destroyed the UN. We've destroyed it. Donald Trump would no more go to the United Nations Security Council for a resolution authorizing the war on Iran than he would go out and hang his ass out in the Rose Garden, which he's destroying, I'm told. So we're in a different world, Nima. We're in a totally different world now. We have destroyed international law. We have destroyed the International Criminal Court. We have destroyed the United Nations. We have taken down everything that we so painfully reconstructed from roughly World War II forward. And now we are the big guy on the street. But Nima, we aren't the big guy on the street.
Larry, Europe is so much important when it comes to the way that Zelensky is trying to say that I'm protecting Europe in Ukraine by fighting Russia. And here is what Netanyahu is saying, that he says that he literally is protecting Europe from Iranian aggression. Here is what he said before going to the United States, and he said in Hungary.
The Iranian axis, the Iranian terror axis, which threatens not only us, but Europe and many of our neighbors in the Middle East. We're committed to doing so. And by doing that, we're also protecting Europe.
What is the threat coming from Iran to Europe? And
well, he's reflecting exactly what we were saying to Putin. You know, not directly, but indirectly, we were saying to Putin, oh, no, we're putting these ballistic missile carriers in the eastern Ukraine to protect Europe and Ukraine from Iran. And Putin's response, Sergei Lavrov's response first was, all you got to do is turn them 80 degrees and they're pointed at Moscow. And all you got to do with those anti-ballistic missiles is take them off and put the ballistic missiles, which are INF treaty missiles, by the way, which we destroyed so we could do this, on the racks, and voila. Moscow is threatened much the same way the U.S. was threatened when we put missiles in Cuba in 1962. That was the whole point of the thing. And the joke on the Pentagon and the joke on America at that time from, you know, people who knew what was happening, Larry Johnson, me, and a host of others, I suspect mostly everyone in the Pentagon, was Putin's right. He's right. Those are not to protect Europe from shots from Iran. Iran had no purpose or reason to shoot missiles at Europe, even if at the time it had them. And I'm not so sure at the time it had the ranging capability, but we didn't care about that. Now it does. And, you know, okay, Bibi's protecting Europe from Iran. What on earth would Iran want to shoot missiles at Europe for? It's nonsense. But Bibi's full of nonsense. Bibi is full of nonsense. I call him sometimes the nonsense man. The trouble is his nonsense is deadly.
do you find Europeans being capable of being bought into this sort of argument on part of Netanyahu?
I think the Europeans probably look around at one another, and even the NATO Secretary General, what's he talking about? I think they're focused right now, and they may have a focus that they created the reality of. Their focus is on Putin. Their focus is on one of the most powerful defense industrial bases now in the world. Their focus is on an army that is churning up Ukraine and destroying it. Their focus is on an army that could, if it wanted to, go on and now take Kyiv and destroy the entire complex that Zelensky so labored to produce, to include himself. They're looking at a Russia they may have incentivized. They may have created this Russia. And so this is how it works. You get a group of states that, you know, start a proxy war like that, prompted in this case by the empire, and they make all these statements, and the empire does too. Remember Joe Biden's statements about what Putin was going to do to Estonia, Latvia, Poland, and every other country that had come out of the Iron Curtain, come out from behind the Iron Curtain, come out of the Warsaw Pact. Biden was adamant about that, and because it was propaganda for the empire. It was propaganda for the proxy war in Ukraine. Well, they may have created the reality. Be careful. Powell used to say his fifth or sixth rule was, be careful what you wish for, you might get it. We've been wishing Russia into being a threat to Europe. We may have created that. I hope not, but we may have. I hope Putin's smarter than that. I hope he husbands his victory, is content with it, and doesn't do anything else. But he's built up the capacity now to do something else. And Europe is 8 to 10 years, I think that's a fair estimate, away from building the kind of capacity, if it even can, given all the quarreling that's going to go on between Berlin, Paris, London, and so forth. If it can do it, they're 8 to 10 years away. We have had them so complicit with our military-industrial complex, which is why Clinton did this. It's why Bill Clinton set the whole thing up in the first place, was to get Lockheed Martin, RTX, all the other big Grumman, all the Boeing, all of them so entrenched in European defense that the Europeans had no choice but to buy American, or predominantly American. Getting out of that, extracting themselves from it, and building their own security identity, their own military, is going to take at least 4 to 5% of every country's GDP and 8 to 10 years to do. In the meanwhile, Putin could wreak havoc, and what would they have to stand up to that havoc? I hope this is not going through Putin's head. I hope he's more circumspect than that, and I hope that he holds out this hope for the bigger deal, the restored relations with Washington, the nuclear complex kind of becoming less a threat, and climate change being dealt with. I hope he's attracted to those more existential threats, that he's not going to deviate from his progress to this point. But, be careful what you wish for. You may regret it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Colonel. Great pleasure as always, Larry.
Thanks for having me.
Take care.
You too. You too.
See you tomorrow.
Yeah. Treat us still coming?
Yeah.
Good. I look forward to it.
Yeah. See you. Bye-bye.